So what Paul is saying, Paul's in prison when he writes this. We know that from other parts of the letter that I didn't read, but it's really obvious. He says, I'm an apostle in chains. He says, because I'm in prison here, you sent our friend Epaphroditus to me, and he was very helpful to me while I was in prison. I mean, it's not a mystery. It's not I wonder if that's what he did. No, he's in jail for the gospel, for preaching the gospel. We don't know for sure which imprisonment this is, because Paul went to jail for that more than once, in several cities, in several different time periods in his life. And the debate kind of goes back and forth about which one this is. But most scholars, most Bible teachers settle on, and I kind of lean towards that this is his imprisonment in Rome. So he's in Rome, in the capital of the known world, the biggest and brightest city there is at that time. And but he's not there on a vacation or hanging out with political elites. He's in prison. And while he's in that prison, while he's sitting there, he writes this letter to a church that he helped start years earlier, reminding them and thanking them for their support, reminding them to keep faithful, to stay on the track, but also thanking them for the ways that they've been faithful, for the ways that they've helped him personally. Of all of the churches that Paul started, the Philippian church seems to be the one that spent the most time kind of paying him back. That they rewarded him with financial gifts, with help. People from their church would go and help him more than any of the other churches. So this is probably the church that Paul liked the best. I mean, that just kind of stands to reason, right? The church that rewards you the most, you're going to kind of tend to like the best. And that's this congregation. That's this group of people for the Apostle Paul. So he's stuck in prison, and he's writing a letter back to them saying, here's the good things. Now, here's what he's wrestling with in this passage. He says, maybe the best thing in the whole world that could happen is I would die. They would put me to death, which was a real possibility. He was on trial, and one of the possibilities was he would die. And he says, maybe that's the very best thing that could happen, because I'd go straight to heaven. Now, I don't know about how you think, but that's the first thing that challenges me. It shakes me to my heart, because I don't think that way. Ever. I never think. If I were in a dangerous situation, I never ever think, wow, maybe the best thing that could happen here is that I could die. Because then I'd go straight to heaven. I mean, I make little jokes like that sometimes, but I never mean it. I never think the very best thing that could happen to me personally is that I would die. I'm like, no, that's not what I want. I believe that I'm going to heaven. I hope I am. I think I am, but I don't ever consider it a bonus, a plus, that my life would end early, that I just see and wrestle with and think about and witness and maybe even cause less junk in the world than if I died quickly. I never prefer that option. I want to live a long and healthy life. In fact, I'm working pretty diligently. I'm not always as consistent as I should be, but I'm trying hard to get in better and better shape. Because I want to live long. Because I have a daughter who I want to see get old. And I want to be there for them. I don't want to watch it from some ethereal place in the sky, if that even works. I don't want it to be like that. I want to be here. Paul says the better thing would be for me to be in heaven, and I get his reasoning as far as logic takes you. Yes, I can see that. If heaven is exactly as we teach it to be, then the better thing is to be in heaven. You're united with God. Everything's perfect. You have no suffering and no pain. But to me, it still seems like, well, that'll be a good option once I'm dead, but I'm not in any hurry to get there. But I think that the truly spiritually mature, while not seeking death, fear it not at all, in a way that I still only kind of echo on in my best thoughts, but never really embrace as my whole attitude. Paul had fully embraced the idea that for him to die is a reward. But he chooses, in this case, to keep living. He wants to keep living, he says. Why does he want to keep living? So that he can continue to serve the church. He loves this church, he cares for this church, and he's like, I want to come and see you again, and I want to be able to preach sermons to you, I want to be able to visit with you, I want to hang out with you, I want to pray for you, I want to teach you more about the God that we serve together, and I can't do that if I'm dead. So I'm going to choose to keep on living, even though it may not be my favorite thing. I think it would be better for you, so I hope to do that. You know, we don't actually know if he ever made it back there. Because depending on which Roman imprisonment this is and what year he wrote this in exactly, he does die at the end of his second imprisonment in Rome. He's beheaded. He doesn't get up from that, just like most people don't. That's the end. And so we're not sure if he ever actually makes it back to this truth. Again, most of the scholars lean towards a no. He never actually gets back to Philippi. Most of these people who read this letter, he never does see them again. But then he goes on, he starts to talk about something else. So he says that he hopes to come and see them again. But then he says this to them. He says, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you, or I am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. You know, some of the great stories about martyrs are pretty awe-inspiring. I don't know if you've heard them, but there are fabulous stories about martyrs from all over the world. There's some great stories about martyrs early in the history of Canada, too. I don't know if you know these stories about... one of the ones that inspires me is this guy named Jean de Brebeuf. Do you know that story? He's a Jesuit priest among natives in what is now Ontario and Quebec, a long time ago. Long before most of Alberta was even mapped. There were people that lived here, but they didn't know much about Europe, and the Europeans didn't know anything about out here yet. The little bit of European exploration that had happened in Canada had happened only in the eastern part of the country. But there were missionaries there, along with the early explorers. They came on some of the first boats. And one of them, this guy, Jean de Brebeuf, he sought hard to find a way to communicate the gospel to the Huron people. Some people describe what happened in his ministry as a great tragedy, because they think that there was some idyllic culture there that ought to have been preserved, so they were in tune with nature, and they should have always just been left alone to do that. I don't know for sure how you feel about that. It doesn't really matter to me. To me, the story of him preaching the gospel to them is a beautiful story. He's sacrificing all of the comforts that he knew, all of the culture that he knew, to go to a foreign land, to learn a language that he didn't know, to hang out with people that he'd never met, to live beside them, to suffer with them, to try to bring he had very limited understanding of medicine, but they had even less, and so a little bit of understanding about disease and medicine. He learned a bit of their language, he started to communicate with them, and they decided, there was a group of natives, a whole tribe basically decided that after decades, a couple of decades of him being there, they decided they would become Christian. And the tribal council, they were part of a 5-nation confederacy. There were 5 native nations. The tribal confederacy met to discuss this decision. To discuss, why did this group change their religious beliefs? And what should we do about it? One of our 5 groups is different now than it was before. And they met and discussed it, and they decided that the answer was to kill them all. I don't mean the missionaries. There were only a couple. I mean, kill all of that tribe. Get rid of them all. And that's what they did. They carried that decision out. They saved John de Brébeuf so they could kill him last. They were like, you're going to suffer. And they made him suffer. They did horrible things. I'm not going to get into all the details, but it's horrific. He was so courageous in the midst of that, that at the end of all of that torture, they cut out his heart and divided it up and consumed it because they wanted to be brave like him. They wanted to have his strength. They recognized there's something in this man that is different, and maybe we can own some of that. We can be part of that. He lived these verses in a way that I don't fully understand. The Apostle Paul embraced this truth in a way I fully don't understand. The Philippian church was encouraged to stay faithful in the midst of a persecution that they were in the middle of, and that was only going to get worse in a way that I don't fully embrace and understand. I want to. I don't know if you caught what the Apostle Paul said here, but he said, bonus number 1, you got to become a Christian. Cool. I agree with that. That's a good thing. I'm with you on that. And then he says, and the bonus prize, the extra special, now you get to suffer for the gospel. Wait a second. We're celebrating suffering? That doesn't come naturally to me. I read it and I agree with it in principle. I'm thinking, yeah, that is the teaching of the early church. It is the spirit of so many of the early apostles. It is what made the early church so fabulous. It is true, like Paul said, and like I explained to you in the story of John de Brébeuf, it's true that if you embrace this, if you just go, kill me, doesn't bother me at all. You can't frighten me. You've got nothing on me. You kill me, I go straight to heaven. You let me live, I'm going to keep telling you about how you can go to heaven. Which is going to be. You have no power here. You can't change anything about what I'm going to do. I'm going to do I'm going to preach the gospel, and if you kill me, I'll stop, because I'll be dead. But I'm not going to stop until the moment you take my life. Until then, I'm just going to keep going. With my last breath, I'm going to proclaim this truth. Nothing you can do is going to change that. Nothing you can threaten is going to slow me down. Nothing you can put in my way is actually going to stop me. I'm going to overcome all of that. I see the truth in that. I embrace it as the right thing. And as Paul says, it is the way to prove to the people who are challenging you that you may have something they don't understand. Right? If you do this, it will be a powerful testimony to your enemies. We threatened that guy with death, he wouldn't shut up. We threw him in prison, he wouldn't shut up. We beat him up, he wouldn't shut up. We threatened him again, he wouldn't shut up. We locked him up again, he wouldn't shut up. We beat him again, he still didn't shut up. And then we killed him, and on the day he died, he wouldn't shut up. He never changed his story, he never changed his tune. That will make your enemies take notice. It will challenge their conception of the truth, right? You want to make them rethink their version of the truth? Well, prove it by dying for it. They'll rethink it. be challenged. If you won't change your story, even when they kill you. And if your friends don't change their story, even when they see you die, they will be convinced at least of the fact that you believe it to be true. I had an interesting Facebook conversation with a seeker-type friend of ours. She's just a friend of ours, but I think gradually she's becoming a seeker because she's, for this long, been a friend of ours. At least that's what we kind of hope is happening. But I noticed she comments on more and more of my religious Facebook posts. Not all of my some of my Facebook posts are about what I had for breakfast. But sometimes, just like everybody else, but sometimes, especially if it's really good or really bad, and I paid for it, sometimes that's on there, but sometimes they're about religious topics, about spiritual things, about more important things. And this friend of Carissa and mine, more Carissa's friend, has started to comment more and more about my religious posts. So I think that God may be stirring something in her heart. I think, I hope, I pray that He is. And one of the things that we were talking back and forth just this last week was about how so often the truths of religious faith, especially of Christianity, are grandiose and admirable. It's really hard to argue against the things that Jesus teaches. It's really hard to argue against those things that God puts in the Scripture, that God put into the lives of the early church. It's tough to say, oh, those are bad. The feeding of the poor, the caring for widows and orphans, the just wholehearted commitment to this truth, even willing to die for it. It's hard to argue against that. It's also hard to find it. We have churches everywhere. We have religious institutions everywhere. Christianity has never been bigger. But it seems like it's, in some ways, never been more diluted either. It's like we have the exact same amount of spirituality, or the exact same amount of faith. We just spread it much, much thinner. And so what used to be real Kool-Aid has now become what we call church juice. I don't know if you're familiar with this term. If you didn't grow up in the church, maybe you're not. But when I was a kid going to church potlucks, church juice was always a little bit different than it was at home. At home, you pour this red stuff into a glass and drink it down, and it was delicious. It was horrible for you, I'm sure. But, dye and fake food flavorings and a bunch of sugar. Horrible for you, but it tasted great, especially to a kid's unrefined palate. I loved Kool-Aid when I was a kid. I haven't drank any in years, but I absolutely loved Kool-Aid when I was a kid. Thought it was the best food on earth. Just this magical powder you pour in the pitcher, and this time it's grape, and next time it's cherry, and then it's strawberry. Oh, it's just a beautiful thing. Except at church, where it would kind of look almost red, and then you'd go to drink it and it would taste like water. Every time. It tasted just like water. Because some well-meaning saint had been like, well, the instructions say that I need this whole package for the 1¾ full pitcher. Oh, we can spread this package between 3 pitchers. I'm sure it'll be fine. Well, it looked sort of red, but it tasted like nothing. It was never satisfying. It's like we've done that with the church. We've got this same amount of spirituality, but we've diluted it and diluted it and diluted it. But I actually don't think that that's because of some mathematical equation. Because I believe in an infinite God. And I think that God is infinitely able to inspire His people to be the saints that the early church was. And that instead of it being like the faith of 10,000 spread over 1 billion of us, it should be the faith of 10,000 replicated in 1 billion of us. And the impact of that group of people would be literally world transforming. The impact of 1 billion people willing willing to die for their faith, willing to give up anything to help the poor, not letting their fear or anything that the enemy could throw at us slow them down from being the saints we're meant to be, would be world-changing. It would happen. 1 in every 7 people on the planet willing to do anything to help the other 6? Of course it would change everything. So, there is a challenge being put to us, being put to me by this scripture. Do you want to be okay? Do you want to look kind of reddish? Do you want to have the faint aroma of somebody holy, something spiritual? Do you want to have, some days, on the very best days, you can kind of pick up just a little hint of something great there. There's some, every once in a while, if they haven't worked out recently and they're not sweaty and just a little bit, they smell okay, just if you're really close to them, or do you want to just give off a fragrance, like a beautiful aroma? The full power of Christ reflected in you. You know, the Bible uses a bunch of different images. It uses aroma, remembering the Old Testament sacrificial system. It uses the idea that we would be the reflection of God, that we would look like Jesus. The early church was called Christians because they were so much like Christ that they kind of made it a nickname. You know, it's like mini-me. You know, they so much look like Jesus that we just were like a carbon copy of the original. Man, they acted like it was annoying to have that around, but it was impactful too. We are challenged to be excellent, to be all of this, to be willing to live every day we have for this truth, and if it's required of us to suffer, if it's required of us to die for it, if it's required of us to sacrifice our comforts for the sake of helping those. You know, we're surrounded by some posters the youth drew this week about the water project we're doing, where we're trying to raise some money to build a well in Africa. It's how many thousand? 8,500. So we need 8,500. Quite frankly, I think that 8,500 from this group of people that are sitting here right now could happen today. But you might have to cancel your next vacations. Several of you, maybe all of you. I don't know for sure how much you spend on vacations. But I think, what's that to sacrifice compared to giving a village in Africa clean water for the first time in 100 years? That seems worth it to me. But it computes on a different set of standards than the ones that we use, that very often I use. All I can really ask of you is that you let yourself be challenged by this passage to do better. I confessed to you at the start that I am challenged by these passages to next time, to the next day, to each day, to do it a little bit better, to pursue the excellent, to forget about the good and the okay, and to go, no, I want to be the excellent. I want to embrace my inner ninja for Christ. I want to get after it. You know, I don't want to have the story of my life be about the mediocre that I've done so far. I want to take my bad habits and drop them. I want to go after